All right, man, we're on. So, welcome everybody. This is Andrew O'Neill, Derek Fahey. This is going to be a fun podcast. Andrew, how's it going, man?
Good. Thank you for having me, Derek. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. We're today we're talking about IP insurance, and I get this question a lot actually from clients. But before we get into it, I want to know a little bit more about you. So, I have some questions here that require one-word answers. All
One
right. So,
answers my best.
okay, here we go. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Best vacation spot,
Cancun.
preferred cuisine,
Sushi.
comedy or drama,
Comedy.
all day, baby. Rain or sunshine.
Sunshine. Come on.
Oh, gosh, favorite sport,
Soccer.
music or podcast when working out.
Music. Definitely.
Oh man, I go between music to silence to podcasts. I'm all over the place. Fiction or nonfiction.
Nonfiction.
Introvert or extrovert.
Extrovert.
Beach or mountains.
Mountains.
All right. Favorite movie genre.
Probably action or action comedy.
Okay. TV. Excuse me. Coffee or tea.
Tea.
All right, that's it, man. Nice work. All right, that's a good way to get warmed up.
Yes, sir.
All right, man. So we actually met at a golf networking group, and I know we kind of connected because you're an avid inventor. Tell me about your your streak in inventions and your background in IP or in inventions, really.
Sure. Yeah, we had a really cool conversation. Started organically, and yeah, when I was a kid in middle school, I grew up down here in Juno Beach, Florida. It's a tight knit little community, pretty old community. So I was one of a couple kids, and to entertain ourselves, because there's just not a lot going on in a sleepy beach town, we would be at the beach all day, every day if we could. I mean, after school every day, and then twice on the weekends. It was just an all day event, and naturally you form a relationship with your ecosystem and the water in that area. And we all did. We formed an attachment to the coral reefs that we would snorkel at and surf over. And I even had names for, 3 or 4 sea turtles that I saw regularly that lived out there. I mean, I could pick them out of a lineup. So that's just how often we were out there. And in 2012, my weekend activity and my safe space really after school became a little bit corrupted by the Macondo Deepwater Horizon drilling rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of people are very familiar with the impact that had on the Louisiana Bayou and New Orleans and Alabama, Mississippi, that area, and even the west coast of Florida pretty heavily as well. Not many people know that damage extended through eddy currents all the way around the east coast of Florida as well. So, when I was in middle school, high school, that area, I watched a lot of the sea life and a lot of the coral reefs that I grew up diving die off quickly.
Really?
A lot of the animals that I was familiar with, the surroundings I was familiar with, the landscape completely changed.
Even on the east coast of Florida.
Yes.
So just for background, horizons on the west coast, like Louisiana area,
Gulf of Mexico.
Gulf of Mexico, and actually took it all the way around, affected on the east coast. Wow.
Yeah, so not many people are aware of that. I participated in beach cleanups, environmental, activities that are surrounded around, trying to preserve the ecosystem that we had. And, granted, we were not nearly as impacted as those states that you previously mentioned, but still an effect that killed off a lot of wildlife. I'd say probably about half of what I had seen remained.
Really?
So, really significant number. So that motivated me, and that was a hinge point in my life to really start questioning authority. And everyone does at some point in their childhood. They question their source of information, whether it's a son to his father or, a student to a teacher or a mentee to a mentor. But that was kind of where I started questioning the narrative that was, renewable energy is super cool and hip and might be the future, but it's not feasible right now. It's not affordable. Nobody can power their home with it. It's really just a novelty invention at that point. So I enrolled in a lot of economics classes at Palm Beach State and FAU. I dual enrolled it throughout high school. I probably had about roughly 30 college credits by the time I graduated high school, that focused on statistics analysis, macroeconomics, microeconomics, and several, a litany of engineering courses, some that were at the actual doctorate level. They were 6,000s level classes. Math and science was always a passion of mine from when I was young. I finished differential equations 1 and 2 by the time I graduated high school, for example. I just
No,
really,
man, diffie man, diffie, not
yeah,
easy.
really liked the stuff. I did. So it all came natural to me, and especially motivated by a childhood passion. I was driven to sort of look closer into what the issue was with solar technology. Why did we have to be in the Gulf of Mexico in the first place to obtain energy for our homes? Why did we have to go that far? Why didn't we build a solar farm? Why didn't we install panels on roofs? Why aren't we looking at wind technology closer to shore that was less impactful to the environment? And the cost was the answer was largely an economy of scale. At the time that I was developing the nuances of an idea that I was putting into the works, the cost of green energy at its least expensive was about 72 cents per kilowatt hour. Coal, oil, and natural gas were all 4 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. For a big energy company or any sort of corporation that's in the business of turning a profit, that's a no-brainer. I mean, no one is going to actively choose to spend 72 cents when they could be spending 6. So my challenge was, and my engineering challenge was, to find a way to make energy more cost effective. And I did that through the lens of solar technology. I evolved a positioning apparatus using what's called a piezoelectric field array of sensors to track the sun in a active and more comprehensive way that was being done at the time. The problem with solar energy, largely, aside from the materials used to develop it, which are problematic environmentally in themselves, is that it's in a fixed mount situation, meaning a statically mounted panel. It's not a very efficient energy absorption method. You have a big bell curve where you have an active range of maybe 4 good hours in the day, and technology has gotten better since I was doing this at 15, but about 4 hours of the day was really peak saturation for a solar panel. So, active tracking didn't exist. There were passive trackers that used astronomical data to, tell an array of panels and microcontrollers where the sun was going to be at the sky at which point in time. But the solar panel is blind. It's a passive system. It's listening to a digital input. What I developed was an active input that used a monocrystalline bistructure sensor that detects the highest level of infrared radiation in the sky at any given point in the day and zeroes in to the accuracy of 1,000th of a degree on that source. And I used microcontrolling blocks to filter out noise like, planes flying over or birds in the sky that were just closer to the panel, therefore generating a larger heat signature. It works very similarly to a Tomahawk cruise missile. That's actually what really began the idea for me, was watching Top Gun with my dad on the couch. And I said, why don't solar panels just do that? And, they did in some ways. I looked into the technology that existed. What I really wanted to do with it wasn't out there. So I set forth and I wrote a provisional, a utility, and a continuation in part, which eventually I brought to a boardroom at the age of 17 or 18 years old. To a couple of companies, some I can disclose, some I can't. I signed NDAs with everybody, and big utility companies in the country really took a close look at it, and a couple moved forward,
That's
and
awesome.
gave the technology the good old college try.
Yeah,
In high school.
that's awesome, man. I love hearing that story. I'm a patent attorney, so I love that. Super cool, man. So, who else should I have to talk about insurance besides, now you're an insurance agent, but an insurance agent that has a chemical engineering background. You didn't tell everybody that, but I know you have a chemical engineering background. But it also has its own patents, which is fantastic. Okay, so let's bring it back down to, why we're here. One of the questions, the reason why I brought you on here is I get these questions a lot. People will either are getting sued because of intellectual property infringement, whether it's a trademark infringement or patent infringement, or copyright infringement. And they want to know, do I have an insurance policy that would cover that? And I'll ask you, is there an insurance policy? Does your general policy cover that, or are there general policies that will cover that?
So that's a very nuanced question, probably without realizing it. I'm going to give you a very attorney-like answer, which is it depends. There are certain carriers that have a big appetite for these types of risks. They understand them. They're intimately aware of all of the cutting edge statutes, limitations, legislation that's being passed, that's been passed. There are some that are very on top of it. There are some carriers that won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. So the challenge for clients that you interact with, and clients of mine, is to find an agent that understands the difference between a good carrier that writes what's called a professional liability package and a great carrier that specializes in intellectual property coverage and insurance. So it just depends. It really does. And within that appetite for intellectual property coverage, there are certain industries that of the few carriers that will write it only like to go into. And your challenge is being faced with a risk manager or an insurance agent that knows the topography and how to navigate it, because it can be rocky.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Okay, so there's three kind of subsets, right? We have, when I think of IP insurance, I think about, okay, I just got sued, and now I want to have insurance for somebody to help me represent myself, right? I have another subset of potential insurance, and you tell me if I'm wrong on this. Sure. Another subset of insurance that says, hey, I'm a manufacturing company, and I'm producing products, and I'm selling the products. And, obviously you have contractual ways you can mitigate risk. And, but let's say you're the owner of the intellectual property, and other people that you're selling to are saying, hey, I want you to indemnify me, that if I get sued, you're going to pay my attorney's bills. That's like another subset of insurance. Like, is there insurance that would cover somebody in the case that, hey, I got sued as a manufacturer, and now I am required to indemnify all these other people that I'm selling these goods to? And then the last one is, what if you own the IP? Okay, what if you own the IP, and are you able to, have like offensive insurance that says, or some sort of product that says, hey, I will actually, if someone is out there that is infringing on my product, I'm going to pay for this insurance so that I can go and enforce my intellectual property. If you could just touch on you touch on the first one. Let's talk about the second one, where you can talk about the second one, which is basically you're a manufacturer and you're selling products, and you want to mitigate or hedge risk, for people that you may be required to indemnify.
Sure. So the second one, believe it or not, is actually easier to find than the first one. I said easy. It's not easy. It requires a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of analysis. But, a little thing about me, I almost never introduce myself as an insurance agent, because I first and foremost consider myself a risk manager and a risk analyst. And that's what I like to get paid to do, because that's what I'm best at. An insurance agent implies a transaction, and I'm not a transactional broker. I don't enjoy, that's my least favorite part about the job. And sometimes there are risks that need to be managed and mitigated. And there are about 8 different ways to Sunday to do that without ever involving an insurance policy. Insurance can be inefficient. It can be chunky. It can be ineffective. And it involves a number of outliers and unknown variables known as underwriters that might view your risk one way or another. And it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to be indemnified. What you want in that sort of a situation is, somebody like me who is familiar with the process, familiar with your product, has taken time to understand what your risk and exposure really is, given you a comprehensive analysis on how to address it, 3 or 4 different ways. And if insurance really is the best option for you, that
Yeah.
is a narrative that I then bring to an underwriting team who tries to underwrite your risk as it exists, not as they think it exists. Uh,
Yeah.
I've handed them a piece of reality. So what the coverage, to answer your question that you're describing, is called products and completed operations coverage. It's written as a part of an overarching policy called the professional liability policy. Professional liability policies come in all shapes and sizes and different colors. Um, there are a number of firms like mine that will write you a professional liability policy. There are not a lot of firms like mine that will take the time to understand what your nuanced exposure levels are in each sub coverage of that massive policy are, and what might be necessary to cover or not cover.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question in short, yes, there does exist insurance coverage for products and completed operations in the event that you need to indemnify a client, a customer, a coworker, whether it's a partnership with another company. There are hundreds of different situations that arise out of this particular issue that are well played out in the insurance arena and can be insured against.
And you said that was the name of that policy was product and operations.
Products and completed operations. So,
Cool.
for example, if you're a manufacturer, you're producing a product, but if you're a massage parlor, it's not really a product that you're selling; it's a completed operation. So, there's no tangible thing that you've given to somebody. It's more of a service. So
Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
that exists as well.
Do they, besides all the documentation, let's say you go through the analysis and you say, you know what, you would be a really good fit for this kind of insurance, the product and completed operations policy, right? You say, you know what, you've hedged your risk with, contracts where you can, but you have this particular set of or subset of risks that we can help reduce your exposure to with an insurance policy. What are the, besides all the information that you think about, like name information, what else can they do? What do they, those kind of underwriters require? Do they require opinions about if you're infringing? Would you have to have a free to operate opinion? What kind of things do they require from the actual potential insured?
So I really like to work with underwriters that are ahead of the curve on technology and really know and breathe and live the stuff on a day in and day out basis. So the underwriters that I interact with regularly, one, they have their own discovery and research team that looks into, specifically on the IP front, what you've got versus the aggregate market and where they might see a couple of problems. So that's going to take them some time. It's going to take them at least a week or two to really rip through it, maybe longer, depending on the situation. And that process typically involves a lot of back and forth and understanding, really trying to garner a complete understanding that I try to assist with as well, with the narrative that I discussed earlier, when initially analyzing your risk. And what it is, and more importantly to them than really what it is how you do it, how it's deployed, how the technology is applied, how the idea is used. That's where the risk really comes in. The idea isn't dangerous by itself, typically speaking. And in terms of a damages perspective on a year-to-year basis, most of the damage doesn't occur just because you hold a piece of intellectual property. Most of the damage occurs based on how you use it. So they do the best job that they can to understand that. And that process, depending on the industry and the sector that the business operates in, is wildly different from company to company.
Yeah, interestingly, what you said there is, you know, um, they understand what's happening, and in our world, clients will come to me and say, "Hey, am I infringing on somebody else's rights? And we would do what's called a freedom to operate opinion to know whether or not they can operate freely in the marketplace. So it's potential. One of the things that they may want to do or see is a freedom to operate opinion. There's kind of sometimes clients will want to have blinders on. They kind of operate in a really highly competitive industry, and we'll kind of operate like, yep, I don't see anything. There's no risk here. Just going to keep on going straight, and it can be risky. So if they operate like that, it's something that
The perfect way to get blindsided.
yes, yeah, which is not a good business decision, right? And the last kind of subset we talked about is offensive insurance. Like, what if you're required to sue somebody or required to take action in some sort of licensing agreements? Typically, if you're selling a product and you own the right, if you are licensing the rights to use a product, the license holder, the owner of the rights, may have a duty to enforce the patents. Have you ever seen any insurance or kind of policy that would actually, take on that risk of going and suing other entities?
Well, one thing I did want to speak to, I'm glad you asked this question. I heard you earlier mention a scenario where you've got a client that's getting sued and now they need insurance. That was kind of how you laid out some of the subsets of points that we've already discussed. That is the wrong order of operations there. The best way to avoid any interruption to your business activity and guarantee that your business gets the coverage that it deserves is by being proactive on the insurance front. If you're already being sued, I'm not going to say it's too little, too late, but underwriters already know there's a risk because there's one already on your doorstep. So they're going to be less willing to evaluate the validity of your product as far as a risk they want to take if trouble has already arrived. Because one, it speaks to the nature of the idea that you're trying to protect, and two, it also speaks to the nature of your ability to manage your own risk. Because if you haven't sought out protection up front, who's to say you're going to continue to seek protection, and why would they want to be a part of that risk journey with you?
Yeah.
So that's one point I wanted to raise. And now to address your statement, I have seen that type of product line. The answer is relatively parallel to the one I've already given, which is that through a due diligence process that an underwriter, a sophisticated underwriter, will undertake. They will provide coverage on the offensive side as well, especially if they see the validity and how rock solid your footprint is in the IP space.
Yeah.
I know from personal experience, my IP, I have a massive footprint in a solar tracking space that exists. I carved out a really nice size and a nice footprint using a sophisticated firm that knew what they were doing. I read through 900 pages of discovery and research that they provided to me, and said, "Is your idea similar to this? Are you duplicating efforts?" And I wasn't. It was a brand new technology in an evolving sector that wasn't attractive fiscally yet. Today, that's a different story. Today, I'm sure there are many companies that would have liked to have written my idea. I mean, the essence of my IP isn't that it's so technologically advanced and dense. There is a lot of quantum physics and mathematics involved, but it's not impossible to reverse engineer. It's just the time period that I was doing that type of work, no one had any interest in, and I didn't care because I was already broke. I was still a student. So it wasn't about being a profitable enterprise. It was about protecting an idea that I had to protect the environment. So
Cool.
as far as policies that it will indemnify me against being proactive about that, I've done a lot of research into the space, and there are a lot of cutting edge companies that have the ability to see value in taking on that type of a risk and providing legal assistance as far as like funding it.
Yeah. Cool.
What you want to watch out for are policy documents or contracts that lock you into underwriting provided firms, meaning like the carrier will provide your legal counsel. You really want the ability to, or the flex. I mean, if you want to go with that, that's a perfectly acceptable outcome. I'm sure most carriers have very competent, litigators that they are affiliated with, but you want to retain as much flexibility as you can, depending on the situation.
Yeah, I would say probably too. I do know that other law firms that will take on a contingency fee basis, just like you would with like a personal injury, where you don't pay any attorney's fees unless you recover damages. So you can do that, but generally speaking, a lot of those firms will do it on a hybrid situation where you have to pay certain fees because litigation in the patent world is extremely costly, which is why many people want to have IP insurance to defend themselves. It's because it's so
Absolutely.
costly to defend. Um, but there are law firms that will go out there and sue on the offensive on a contingency fee basis or like a quasi contingency fee basis. Like maybe it's you pay the fees, like the costs, like filing fees or court reporter fees, and then we would do it for free in exchange for a percentage on the back end. Interestingly, anytime that kind of takes place, they require two things. One, the law firm wants to know if the patent is valid because you can invalidate patents. It's one of the
Sure.
first offenses, right? And then the second thing that they want to know is whether or not the product is infringing. In fact, when you go to file a lawsuit for patent infringement, you actually have to have a product and you have to have like a detailed analysis about whether or not the accused device or service is infringing on the actual patent. And if you don't do that, the attorneys also could be on the hook for damages because of a bogus lawsuit. So, but cool. So in summary, you can insure all those types of risks. It just depends. Yeah.
Absolutely. It requires some tact. It requires some creativity. It requires a lot of effort on the part of your broker or your risk analyst in my case.
Yeah.
But you can custom sculpt pretty much anything out there if you get a good relationship with an underwriter that sees merit in the risk you're asking them to take. It's all
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. What about costs? When I say costs, can you maybe talk about costs relative to other policies that maybe a company would have? So, for example, if a manufacturing company has a policy on, just give me an idea of, as far as costs, costly, not costly, small amount, big amount, any cost would help.
Sure. It's difficult to speak to values, obviously, because it's all super subjective, but it just depends on the nature of the business. I'm going to give you specific examples and maybe this will answer your question. If you're a manufacturing company that's built around a product and it's one product and you have IP on that product in a competitive environment, the cost really shouldn't be a factor at all, albeit inexpensive because relative to your risk of like workers' comp injury, which is another insurance item, the cost of your equipment that you're using to manufacture can be super expensive and costly to insure as a result. It's really a nominal charge, but it's often overlooked because the insurance industry is laggard and relatively uneducated. I mean, I'm uniquely positioned because I have IP and I have a background in chemical engineering. I would be hard pressed to say you're going to find another insurance agent out there that has a similar background. I really do focus on STEM and I really focus on STEM risks because that's where I can add a lot of value to conversations. But it's not even really the price that's usually a factor in these discussions. It's just a lack of education out there. And, that's why I really was excited to do this podcast because not many people even know it's a potential insurance coverage item that they need to look at. They're just having that conversation with their broker. So I encourage the conversation with the broker. I encourage the more people that I get interested in this line of coverage, the more affordable it becomes for everybody. Just because by nature of volume and capital at risk for these insurance companies, The more people that they dedicate to it, the more time they spend interacting with the space, and the underwriters spend interacting with clients, and brokers like myself. The more comfortable the industry gets, the lower the risk costs. So, relative to the bulk of a professional liability package, barring a pharmaceutical company or something, some crazy risk like that, it's relatively inexpensive compared to everything else.
Gotcha. Do you find yourself having to go to a different carrier than like a regular general liability policy for the IP insurance kind of policies?
No, I don't.
Really?
I think a lot of the big first in class, AAA credit, A plus credit from, AM Best type companies, they have a division that's dedicated to this, albeit a small one, but they often do.
Yeah.
And if they don't have the appetite for the particular industry that the risk is in, there's always specialty companies that are centered. There's a specialty company, I'm sure, that centers and focuses solely on IP and professional liability for pharmaceutical reps or pharmaceutical companies or development companies, research firms. There's usually specialty companies that are out there that exist just for that purpose. And often to sort of isolate, they might even be owned by the parent company, the larger one, but to isolate the risk and really separate themselves and distance themselves from, some of those less desirable sectors, they partition it off as a separate specialty company.
Gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, I really, I get these questions fairly frequently, especially after someone gets sued, which is too late.
It's not, but it's better if you got it before.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Especially, yeah, exactly. So yeah, this is really helpful information for certainly some of my clients. And, you know, thanks for getting on the call today and the podcast. The information is really helpful. If anybody watching has any questions, we're going to put the information, Andrew's information to the chat, so you can grab it and you can, if you want to give a quick shout out of your information now, Andrew, so people can have it.
Sure. So I'm the director of strategic growth and enterprise risk at Burke Bogart Brownell. You can call our landline 561-392-8888, or my first initial of my name, A, and my last name, O'Neill, which Derek will kindly spell in the comments below, at bbbins.com. That's my email. Happy to answer any questions. No obligation. I really do nerd out on the stuff. I enjoy it. I love hearing people's ideas. So and I'll sign any NDA you want me to. I just get excited and nerd out over the stuff. So happy to help any way I can.
Awesome, bud. Well, thanks for joining, bud. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Appreciate it.